I want to welcome you to this webinar. We're going to talk about a team approach for dealing with anger today. I have some slides I want to show you, so I'm going to start by sharing the screen. First thing I want to do is I want to welcome those folks who are part of the Parent Training Center program that we have. That's a program that helps churches intentionally and systematically disciple parents. So if you're with us from the Parent Training Center program, we just want to welcome you. Also, those who are members with the National Center for Biblical Parenting, you have access to the recordings of all of the webinars in the member library, and so we want to welcome you here as well. This is a rather challenging area, I think, in family life, is dealing with emotions. And I suspect that the people who are in this webinar are experiencing some challenges in one way or another. And so I think it'd be very appropriate for us to take a moment and just pray that God would use this next hour strategically in your personal life and also in the life of your family. So let's pray together. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you now for this time that we can spend together. I know that some may be still putting kids to bed or have kids busy occupied in the other room. And I just ask, Lord, that you would bless our time and that the things that I say would be most helpful for families and they would be able to take away something that they can apply to their homes today. We know this is really sacred ground here, and as we deal with emotions, we're tying very closely to our own spirituality. So we ask, Lord, that you would work deeply in the midst of this conversation that we have. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. The material I'm about to share with you comes from the newest book that we are writing. Joanne Miller and I are writing a book called 10 Traits of a Successful Family. Now, this particular book is different than other books we've written because we're looking at the goal of what makes a successful family, not the individuals in family life, but we're looking at the family as a whole. What can we do in a family to strengthen it, and how does the family itself deal with various issues? So this is one of 10 webinars. Now, I may do some other webinars in the midst of all of this, but over the next 10 months, one a month, I'm going to do one chapter from the book, 10 Traits of a Successful Family. Now, in this particular webinar, we're going to deal with the question of emotions. And chapter 1 is entitled A Successful Family Both Communicates and Controls Emotions Effectively. So we're going to talk about using a team approach or a family dynamic to address the emotional challenges in a home. My next webinar will be coming up next month, and in that one, we will be talking about reducing tension in your home by teaching your family 3 tools to solve problems better. So problem solving, how does your family solve problems? I find that many families don't do real well with that. You know, maybe mom's running things around and she's getting things going, and then dad comes in and he takes over, and there's not just a cooperative way of dealing with problems, but that's one of the signs of a successful family, that they know how to solve problems well. And all of the 10 traits that I'm going to share come from God's Word with practical applications from the Bible. In fact, we're going to look at the way God's family, the church, deals with various aspects of the church family life. And we're going to take principles from those principles that God's given to his church, and we're going to apply them to the earthly family. So it's a rather fascinating study for me, and I'm enjoying the process, and we'll share that with you at these webinars one a month. So you might want to stay on track with us and watch what's happening in each one. I spent a lot of time on this particular webinar preparing for you because I know that the challenges you're facing here can be significant. And we're going to talk about emotions in the home. And I want to talk about a team approach. But, you know, in order to do that, I first want to explain to you about an individual plan for addressing anger. And the reason for that is because invariably in a home, there is someone, at least one person, that has a significant anger problem. That might be you. You're listening to this because you have some real struggles with anger. It might be your spouse has some real problems with anger. And it may be a child. And so in my counseling practice, I regularly work with children and parents in regards to anger. And so I want to give you a quick overview of dealing with an individualized plan. I'm not going into depth here, But if you have an individual with a problem, I don't want to ignore that. That's a significant problem that must be addressed. So there are several things that I would suggest we do in order to help our kids to move forward. The first thing is to, when we're working with a serious anger management problem with a child, is to transfer responsibility to the child who helps develop the plan. Instead of mom saying, hey, you need to count to 10 or you need to go do such and such, the child is involved in the development of the plan. When we're dealing with emotions, we find that to be most helpful. And so getting the child involved in the solution is strategic. The second thing, and this is a multifaceted approach. It's not just a reward punishment model. It's a multifaceted approach. The second thing we do to help an individual deal with anger is we're firm, and we have a workable correction routine. I'm particularly talking about children here. If you're dealing with a spouse, God bless you, and we'll have to work on that in some ways to influence that person. But with a child, we want to establish some firmness, and we want to have a routine that's the same regularly that has to do with correction. So that correction routine we're going to use, and it's a teaching routine that gives children some learning mechanisms in the midst of the routine. The third thing that we do is we offer lots of relationship to this child, because a child who's angry often feels like they're the victim, that everybody's out to get them, that the problem is everybody else's fault, and so on. And so in addition to transferring responsibility so that the child takes responsibility for his anger, we're also doing a lot of relationship building, because on the other side, we're going to be putting some pressure on the child to make some changes. So we want to work pretty significantly in that area of relationship building. Another area that we're going to work on with the individualized plan for addressing anger is we're going to identify the arenas, and this is where the child tends to experience anger. I call them arenas because that's where the action takes place, and the child needs to be aware, become more aware of this. The problem is that the child may have an arena of when he's moving from one activity to another, and he has a hard time with that transfer. Or maybe he has a hard time with an annoying brother. That's the arena. Or maybe it's when mom gives him an instruction he doesn't want to do. Or maybe when something happens he just doesn't like. And so that could cover a lot of different ground. And when a child experiences those things, then sometimes they erupt with anger episodes. So what we want to do is we want to identify the arenas, and then we're going to develop some strategic ways of addressing each of the arenas. And by the time we're done with a few arenas, it starts to affect many more as we're working with a child's heart and dealing with anger issues. Another part of the plan is to practice doing the right thing. So it's not all about correction. Remember, up in the other corner, we talked about correction and firmness. Those are very important. But here we're talking about practicing doing the right thing, practicing the working it out in positive ways. And those are really therapy sessions, I think, that we work on at home with children to help them with right responses. The last thing I want to suggest in an individualized plan for anger is we have to train all the others in the house how to respond. Because what happens often is one child has anger outbursts and the other kids just are struggling with that and don't know how to handle it. Now, I just want to have presented that to you. If you're dealing with some serious anger issues in your home, you might want to arrange a phone coaching session with me. I counsel with families around the country on the phone. And in the midst of that, and able to give them action plans that are uniquely tailored for that particular child and show you how to develop that plan for the child. But I don't want to spend our time on individual anger problems here. But at the same time, I don't want to ignore them, because if you have anger fluctuating in your home, it's likely that there's somebody that's the spark for that, or someone who is attracting and a magnetic pull for others to get sucked in. So we want to be able to address that individually. But now I want to spend some time addressing this as a family, because it's very important for a family to have a plan for dealing with emotions. The reason for that is because emotions are contagious. They aren't just something that happens in one person's life and everybody else is unaffected. But emotions are contagious. And you know that because if Billy, who's 4 years old, starts getting angry, mom all of a sudden feels angry and wants to respond in kind. Or dad and mom are yelling at each other, and children start feeling anxious about what they're seeing. We're connected emotionally, and that connection does different things to different people. And we all have our ways of responding to that. So I want to address the family unit as emotions increase by one person or more people in the home. How are we going to handle that? Because a successful family is able to deal with emotions more effectively than not. Emotions have power, and sometimes the person who has the emotional challenges holds everybody else captive, really. And so everyone else is walking on eggshells, never knowing when this child's going to erupt. And so that it's important to recognize that, because we're going to try to address this so that not everybody's afraid of the emotion or has their typical responses. What often happens is that when emotion takes place in one person, the tendencies of different family members are different. One person might want to get in there and help challenge the other person and attack back or something. Someone else wants to come in and solve the problem so the anger dissipates. Another person just wants to get out of there and goes to their room. What we want to do is teach the family how to address the emotions that are going on in family life, and then bring everybody into the solution so that we can move forward. Now, keep in mind that people who have more emotion, a bigger scope of emotions, have an asset. You just got to understand that God's given them more emotion. That doesn't mean their emotional episodes are warranted, but that bigger scope of emotions is an asset. It's probably what makes your family fun. That person also is enjoyable, enjoys being with, you enjoy being with them, they're excitable, a lot of good things happen as well. But this problem of anger is creating some issues that need to be addressed. So keep in mind that each person is different when it comes to their personality, both in how they handle their emotion and also how they handle the emotions of others. So that's what we're focusing on. How do we all work together in this family to be able to keep the emotional tenor of our family in check? Another thing that's important is to recognize that every individual who has a strong emotional tendency has to learn how to manage themselves. That's their challenge. They need solutions that will help them to be able to move forward, and we want to help them do that. So every individual who has an emotional challenge must learn how to manage that, and every person then who needs to relate has to deal with their own issues, which leads us to this last point, in that the family must learn how to respond. How are we going to handle it when somebody gets angry? Okay, that's basically just laying a framework for where we're headed here. But now what I'd like you to do is take a moment and evaluate your family. You might even just jot down a list of all the people in your family. Put a number next to each one, a number between 1 and 5, that rates each family member based on their ability to express or control their own emotions. And let's say 5 is really intense and 1 is really low. So let's say that you go through and you say, well, Dad's at a 3 and Mom's at a 2, and Billy, he's 14 and he's at a 4. But 4-year-old Sam, he's at 5, no doubt. He's just really having a hard time. So go through and measure just for yourself. You don't have to show this to the rest of your family. But just measure for yourself, because it'll help you pinpoint the areas where you need to spend some work and some time working on this. So measure each family member, and we're measuring their own ability to deal with their own emotions, that either to express them or to control them. How well do they do? 1 to 5. 5 is really intense. 1 is they're pretty mellow and able to deal with the control and expression. The second question you want to ask, and you can put this in the next column, is on a scale of 1 to 5, rate each member of your family's ability to manage themselves when someone else in the family is angry. Now, maybe you haven't noticed this. Maybe you get sucked into the anger, and when you're sucked in someone else's anger, you're not looking around at other people. But you might want to take a moment and evaluate other people's ability to handle the situation, because that'll help you know where you're going to pinpoint some time and energy and efforts in your family. So the person who's is a 5 is really intense again, gets involved in the problem, or is dramatic in some way, where 1 is they're able to handle things pretty well. So use that scale to help you then map out your family and see where the challenges might exist. We're not just dealing with individuals here, but as we look at the individuals, we're able to put a map together of the whole. Now, I want to suggest to you a couple of commitments that I think every family needs to make if they're going to deal with emotions well in a family. So I would suggest you pull your family together, and you say to them, I know that sometimes families can be really challenging when it comes to emotions, And sometimes our family kind of experiences emotions where somebody gets mad. Sometimes I get angry as a dad, or mom gets angry. And we want to be able to manage our emotions better, because emotions have the power to draw us closer together, or they have the power to push us apart. And if we can make some commitments together, 2 commitments, that's all I'm asking from you, 2 commitments together, then we can do better. So let's work on this. And in fact, let's allow God to give us the supernatural strength to deal with these, because both of these we're going to see have opportunities for the Holy Spirit to empower us to do what's right. So let's look at these 2 commitments, and let's try to embrace them as a family so that we can experience closeness better. The first commandment is to own it. When I say own it, that means everybody is responsible for their own emotion. If you're a young person watching this now, then I want to suggest to you that your anger is not caused by anyone else. You can't say that person made me angry. Now, there are things that provoke us to anger, where a child's annoying or a mom asks you to do some work or something. That is true. But your angry response is your choice or your pattern or your reaction. And you can own that, and you don't have to be a victim. You are in control of that. And we can help you be in control of that. In fact, that's what a family is all about, is the practicing of developing skills that will help you for the rest of your life. So you will often find yourself in life in frustrating situations where you will you'll be tempted to have an anger episode. That's what I call them, an anger episode. So in my counseling practices, I'm working with a young person, or I'm working with a child to help them address their anger. We're talking about episodes, and we're trying to help them to reduce them. Now, when we're trying to own it, we're dealing with a particular, I think, a particular part of Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 and 23. So in Galatians 5, 22 and 23, we have what the Bible calls the fruit of the Spirit. There are 9 words there. And when we're owning it, what we're saying is, I have a problem, or I have a reaction I'm trying to manage, what I want to develop in my life, and I want to take this one piece. The third one is peace. That's what I need to develop in my life. I want to develop peace in a way that's going to allow me to not experience anger episodes as often. We're going to cut down on the quantity of anger episodes. I'm going to manage my own emotion and try to be more at peace. I want to point out that this is it's the fruit of the Spirit, which means this is a supernatural quality. Sometimes when I'm working with parents, they'll say, oh, I just can't. I just get drawn in. I get so upset. And what I suggest is, why don't you do this? Why don't you get brain dead and spiritually alive? Why don't you try that? When I say brain dead, what I mean by that is turn off your brain when it comes to emotions and allow the Holy Spirit to empower you in that moment. When you do, then that peace that passes all understanding can melt over you in the midst of a situation, and you can have peace as you go forward. Now, the children can do the same thing, and sometimes they need training, and we're going to do some things to help them to make this happen. But notice that we're focusing in on one part of the fruit of the Spirit, which is the peace. Now, when you're taking on commitment number 1, to own it, I want to give you some advice. The first piece of advice, if we're going to train people in the family to deal with this well, is you don't want to get rid of the problem without addressing the anger. Now, I think sometimes it's very tempting to step into the situation. Okay, what's wrong? What's wrong? You're bothering him? Okay, you're in trouble. And so, boom, we quickly try to solve the problem. Here, give the toy back to him. Now, are you okay? And we solve the problem instead of deal with the anger. Now, and we do this because we know that if we can get rid of the trigger, then the emotion will subside. But that often comes from our own discomfort with emotional tension. Sometimes, I just want to suggest, sometimes that's probably a good idea, is to get rid of the trigger and so the emotion will subside. But sometimes we don't solve the problem for the child. We first help the child to address the anger, and then we solve the problem, because we're using the situation as a therapy opportunity for a child to address some of the inner conflict they're experiencing. There's 2 problems. There's the one on the outside, which is the problem of I can't have a snack right now, and so I have a temper tantrum. And there's the inside, which is the anger episode that's going on inside and coming out. And so what we want to do, I would suggest we don't start bargaining with a child. Say, okay, well, look, you can have a snack in 10 minutes. Remember, maybe we need to say, wait a minute, we have a problem here with anger, and we need to do something about it. So addressing the anger in the midst of the problem may be a good way to bring some therapy into life and teach children how to deal with their tension, rather than just quickly solving the problem with the child. Another piece of advice here when it comes to commitment number 1, to own it, is that we use a break to settle down or force others to do the same. And I'm not just talking about kids. See, if you're upset with what's happening and you come into the playroom and it's a mess, or you see a child writing on the wall or something, I mean, it's terrible, and you may need to deal with it right away. But then before your emotions starts flaring, you might want to take a break. That is, pull back, settle down, and then come back in and deal with it more rationally and more logically. But often that requires a break, and certainly with children it does. So if you've got a child that's very emotional, you're going to want to use a break strategy to force the child to settle down. And this is where the correction of an individual child becomes part of the therapy, where we're saying to a child, you need to go sit down, take a break, settle down, change your heart, come back and see me when you're ready. Rarely do children go there calmly. Often children go there and they put up a fuss. But what we're teaching them is life cannot go forward. You need to pull back, because that's part of what it means to manage your own emotion. Everybody needs to take responsibility for their own emotion. You need to own it. And so you need to sit down and settle down before you're able to go back and move forward. So that's very important. Commitment number 1, to own it, means that we parent in a different way, I think. We're helping children, even by the words we use. I understand that you have an anger problem, or that you're prone to anger episodes, or you're tempted to get angry with your brother. I understand that he is annoying, but you have a choice when it comes to his annoying behavior. You do not have to get angry and react to him. So even the words we use as parents are helping children own their own emotion. It takes time to develop this control in family life, but it's really helpful. And so we ask the family, everybody in the family, to make the same commitments. Number 1 is to own it. Let me give you another solution here, or suggestion when it comes to owning emotion, and that is to brainstorm as a family for solutions to anger. And these are common things. I find it really helpful in my practice as I'm working with a child who's angry to say let's stop for a moment. Let's ask Mom, what do you do to keep yourself under control so you don't have an anger episode when you start to get angry? And we listen to Mom's ideas. Dad, what do you do? I counsel with children while parents are watching so that parents can learn from the experience. And so I'll turn to Dad and I'll say, Dad, what do you do to help you deal with the anger that you're experiencing so you don't have a anger episode? We can brainstorm with other members of the family. We can ask the 6-year-old or the 10-year-old, what do you do? Because every person has emotions. Every person has to deal with their own emotion and hold themselves, be able to manage themselves. So asking the family for solutions is a great way to get the family interacting together and bring this as a team so that the family itself is developing these solutions. I think it's also helpful as we're brainstorming as a family to pull a child aside and say, look, I know your brother gets angry at times, and you could be part of the solution as you're working here with him. And so you might think of some solutions you have. Maybe in the moment isn't the best time to reveal them, but you might come to your brother later on and say, hey, I've got an idea for you. And so now we're working as a team. We're recognizing that Billy has a problem with his anger, but we're not all just trying to provoke him, or we're not just tolerating him. We're all trying to work together. Certainly Mom and Dad are using their authority to step in and do some of those individual things we talked about earlier so that Billy's needs to work on his anger. But we're also involving the family because we're all emotionally connected, and sometimes kids can be helpful with each other, but all of us need to know how to deal with the internal feelings that we're experiencing when one child's out of control. And if you've got to discipline a child and that child's sitting in the break and screaming, you know that the other members of the family are feeling it. And so you want to be able to help them deal with it. Commitment number 1 is to own it. There's a second commitment that we want to talk about, and that is don't get sucked in. Now, when I say don't get sucked in, here's what happens. The emotional tension increases in a room when someone starts escalating. That escalation can take place with sarcasm. It can take place with a bad attitude. It can take place with yelling. Often the voice gets loud. Sometimes someone gets intense with physical. And when that happens, other people often get sucked into that person's anger, and then it starts to enlarge. It starts to get to be a bigger problem. So we need to have a commitment to not get sucked in. Now, not get sucked in emotionally, although we often have to step in and stop a fight that's going on. We have to step in and discipline a child, but we do it without getting emotionally sucked in. So we remain calm but firm at the same time. I'd like to go back to Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 and 23 again. And this time I want to focus in on a different part of the fruit of the Spirit to help us not get sucked in, and that is self-control. Self-control helps us to manage our own selves when the tensions out there in the room invite us to do something different. So if we as a family can agree that we're not going to get sucked in, parents and kids, then that can go a long way to help us to develop more peace in our home and to keep emotions in check. Let me give you some advice about the second commitment, don't get sucked in. The first thing, I want to go right back to what we said in the last point. Remember in commitment number 1, own it? The very first point was don't get rid of the problem without addressing the anger. I want to bring that over here too. Because sometimes what happens is that a parent or a young person, when someone gets angry, will come in and try to overpower them with emotion to try to shut them down. When we do that, and then we're trying to shut down the anger, we're missing the opportunity to help a child make some significant changes. So be careful about getting rid of the problem without addressing the anger that the child has. That anger is a problem. There's two things going on. There's the problem, and then there's the anger reaction toward the problem. Both are important. Keep that in mind. It's just going to be helpful for you as you're trying to not get sucked into the situation. And that's what brings me to the second point. Don't use anger to overpower an angry person, because that's counterproductive, and you get sucked in, and it works. You can shut somebody down with your anger, or a sarcastic remark, or being mean, or even violent. As kids are fighting, they can be violent with each other, but it's counterproductive in the end, and it damages relationships. So we have to have different plans for moving into those situations that don't involve anger and emotion. I would suggest that another piece of advice here is to remain both firm and calm. So I do think we have to come into the situation calmly but firmly, usually. Usually you're going to come in and you're going to say, you need to stop what you're doing. You need to go settle down. Change your heart. But we're not doing it with anger. We're doing it calmly, firmly and calmly. Some parents have a hard time with this. They have a hard time being firm and calm. The more typically what they'll be is firm and harsh, because they think that harshness empowers their firmness. I would suggest that we can be calm and firm at the same time, and that's a skill that's developed on the part of parents. So working on that can help you to be more effective when someone else is being angry. I do think that firmness is important, because it's firmness that builds character, sets fences with children, and helps them see that they cross the limits. And when a child's doing that with their anger, then we've got a serious problem that we need to address. And lastly, I just want to say about this point is we want to empower every family member with a plan, which means that if someone has a problem with getting angry, or you find yourself as a parent arguing with a particular child and it gets intense sometimes, it'd be good for you to look around to see what's going on with the other kids. Because if Susie typically gets out of the chair, goes into her bedroom, maybe that's a good thing for her to do, just get out of the way. However, it may be that something's going on inside of her heart, and she needs a plan to deal with her own emotional tension when anger is expressing itself in the family. And this gets us back to the whole idea of every person in the family needs to know how to manage the emotional tension when it starts to increase. And so I would say to Susie, go into her room later on and say, wow, it looks like you wanted to get out of there when you saw that Billy and I were getting into it. I just want to ask you, when the emotional tension in the room starts to increase, what are you thinking? Is getting out a good thing for you to do, or are you getting out and feeling anxious inside and upset? I want to help you process that emotion so that you aren't going around with some tension inside of you that's unnecessary. Let's work on this together. Coming alongside and comforting a child who's upset with other people's emotion can be a real helpful thing in a home and help kids know how to respond well. Ideally, in a family, we're going to implore this verse, which says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. We're back to our peace word. And sometimes a young person will say, well, it's not possible in my home. I can't live at peace with everyone. Well, maybe that's true. However, maybe you have a toolbox that's too small. And with some strategy and with some help, you could enlarge that toolbox, develop some more ideas, some more tools in the toolbox to help other people be at peace and for you to be at peace as well. I like it that Paul says, as far as it depends on you. He's transferring responsibility to each person. You take care of yourself. There's some things you can't control about the other person. But as far as it is working with you, that's really important. We want to stay on track with living at peace in our own lives. So that is going to be our target as we're working forward in our family. Now, if you hold your family accountable and you have a meeting and you say, hey, family, how are we doing with this? What can we do to move forward here? Then we're going to start moving toward that target in a more effective way. Yes, you're going to have to work with the individual who has some anger issues. And you're going to work in an imperfect world. Maybe you have a mate who is angry and you've got to work within that. That's okay. We can work with other members of the family and help each person know how to address that. You can even say, when dad yells at you like that, that's not right. But the way you handle it is very important. So you can handle this in the best way, and I'm going to try to equip you to do that. So a successful family is going to have a plan for dealing with anger as a family. And we're going to talk about it. We're going to know how to communicate emotions and so on. This means that if you're working with your kids in a home, you don't want to be afraid of the emotions of others. I know it's tension producing, but if you can become more comfortable with the tension, then often you can navigate within the emotional tension to help other people come to grips with their own emotional problems and their emotional tendencies. So try to work yourself on not being afraid of the emotions of others, and you'll do really well at caring for them and trying to set up some solutions. Secondly, you want to use a multifaceted approach to help your family address emotional challenges. So keep in mind, it's not a simple solution here. You're going to use discussion. I would say getting together and having a discussion about anger and the kinds of things that make us angry in family life, and kind of each one responds differently to that. Just talking about that is good. But also firmness is important. We're not going to live this way anymore. Using the break and saying, you need to take a break and settle down. Change your heart. Come back and see me when you're ready. Let's brainstorm about this. What do you do when you're starting to get upset to prevent yourself from going over the edge or having an episode? Those kind of conversations will draw a family together, and they help a family work out some of the challenges that they're facing on that level. Now, I want to allow you to ask some questions, but before I do, I want to point out some of the resources that we have along these lines that you might be interested in. And these resources come in this wheel. First, I want to point out number 8, which is in the upper left-hand corner, 10 Traits of a Successful Family. That book is not written yet. I'm writing it now. And so what we're talking about here is emotional control in family life. That's one of the chapters. I don't know if it'll be chapter 1 or not, but it's the first chapter I'm dealing with this year. Next month, it's going to be solving problems. How do we solve problems instead of allowing them to move into conflict? So we'll talk about the peacemaker core and what that looks like in a home, dealing with problem solving. But if there are a number of resources that can help you address some of these issues. One of them is the Action Plan book, and all of these you can find on the link at the bottom. You can learn more about them. But the Action Plan is not just a book. It's 12 audio sessions, 12 chapters, 12 meetings you have with your child, because the idea of Action Plan is you're moving your child from where he is now to where he needs to be with an action plan. So your plan of action is to help your child change. That you would find helpful. The children's program, Hero Training Camp, is helpful. All this particular material is really working on the heart of a child in some strategic ways. The second one is a Christian Parenting Handbook that extends more broadly your tools for working with children, and it has its companion guide that helps you develop a biblical philosophy of parenting. And the other one mentioned on the website is the anger program that we have, and the CD is $6. It's an MP3 you can download. And that MP3 is one that has a specific plan for helping children deal with anger in their lives. Okay, so you can go ahead in the question answer portion of the webinar there. There's a good place for you to ask questions. Go ahead and you can put your questions in there, and I'll try to respond to anything that you want to ask there. All right, let's take our first question. How do you take a break when your kids follow you? I have tried telling them that mommy is taking a break to calm down and don't come in, but they either come in anyway or they bang on the door or call me endlessly. It's awfully hard to calm down like that. My kids range in age from 14 months to something else. I don't have the rest of what they are, but that's okay. All right, so it is really hard to take a break from family life, especially when you have one that's 14 months old, to take a break from that. However, what you want to start doing, I would suggest you're saying to your kids individually, work with them individually, and say something like this. There are times when I get upset, emotionally upset, and I need your help. So I want to ask you, if I get upset and I need to take a break, that you will allow me that time to take a break. Now, some kids get upset when parents move off the scene because they think they're going to get in bigger trouble, or they want to resolve conflict quickly because they aren't happy with the emotional tension. Or I don't know why your kids are following you, but if they're unhappy with the emotional tension, then it's just a sign that we really need some help in this area. So sometimes you can, shut your door in your bedroom and go in your bathroom and shut the door and try to just block it all out, even though they're banging on the door, and try to settle down. But you may have to develop the ability to take a break in the midst of kids by just being quiet and turning around and working on something for a few minutes, just settling your heart down. I'll tell you one story about a mom who had a 13-year-old daughter who wouldn't back off. So when mom, we talked about mom would stay in the situation, it would just escalate. She just knew she had to get out of there. So she wanted to take a break. And so she would try to go into her room, and her daughter would follow her in there. Her daughter would follow her around the house. I'm not mad. We can talk about it right now. On and on and on. And in the midst of that, we were trying to figure out, what do we do? How do we help mom in that situation? Because the daughter continues to raise the intensity level when mom wants to slow it down. How do we help with that? I suggested to mom, why don't you do this? Why don't you go in the bedroom, leave the door open, and if your daughter comes in, get down on your knees and pray and say, God, I don't know what to do in this situation right now. I just pray that you would help me know how to respond, help my daughter to settle down. Lord, I really need some help here. I don't exactly know what to do. Would you please help me? So she tried that. She got down on her knees when her daughter came in the room, and her daughter didn't know what to do. And as she was praying, her daughter turned around and went back out of the room. Now, I don't know if that'll work in your home. I don't know if it's appropriate in your given situation. But we have to, part of what makes a team approach to anger work is that we are recognizing that emotional tension in a home that's caused by anger is unhelpful. It's not good. It's damaging to relationships. And each person who's causing that to ramp up is contributing to damage in the family. So at least in this situation, if the child continues to pursue you, then I would suggest that some discipline is in order. And you might say to her, look, what you're doing is wrong. Okay, I need some time to settle down. If you can't honor me and allow me to settle down for a few minutes, then I'm going to discipline you. Okay, and so you may not get out of that episode for a moment until that discipline is established or set or whatever. So that's just one idea. I want to be sensitive here because I don't know all of your kids, but if there's a child who is adopted, for example, and we're dealing with reactive attachment disorder, and you step out of the room, that can feel inside to a child as abandonment. And so I want to be really careful with that as well. There's not just one right way to parent here. There's lots of good ways to parent. So if we can be careful about the solutions and try to weigh them out and choose a good one that's helpful in any particular family, that'd be helpful. Rather than say, hey, there's one way you have to do it. I sometimes get frustrated when I look at parenting blogs and there's some person who says, well, this is what we did in our family and this is what you need to do. For example, you just need to be firm. Take away all this stuff until he changes. Well, that may work in one family, but in another family, we need a different solution, maybe. And so I'm always careful to learn as much as I can about the family before I offer solutions. And I offer them humbly, recognizing that if this one isn't working too well, then we need to go to another one in order to help children change. A break is a good idea. A break is a helpful thing to establish in family life for children of any age. So let me address that question as well here. How is the break helpful? What the break does is is a skill that children need to learn. Everybody needs to learn a break. It's an adult skill. We share it with children. It's not just discipline. It's not a punishment. It's not like timeout. But a break really forces the child to sit down in a particular place, and it transfers the responsibility to the child by saying, I would even use these words. You need to take a break, settle down, change your heart, come back and see me when you're ready. The come back and see me when you're ready transfer responsibility to the child, so the child has to initiate to return. I like that approach. I think it's much more therapeutic, strategic for a child who has to initiate to return. Sometimes children have a hard time with that, so we coax them out. But the idea is we want the child to have that responsibility of coming back. The other thing with the break is that it slows down the process. Things happen quickly. And so when they happen quickly, then escalating emotions take over family drama. So you want to be really careful with that. Look for patterns that exist in family life. If Billy and Susie tend to get into it with each other, I would meet with Billy by himself and Susie by herself, and I would meet and give them ideas for knowing how to respond. But pulling back as a break, even if they do it for themselves, make children learn how to put themselves into a break, which is great. Just pull back, settle down before you solve the problem. I will work with you as a parent. Come and talk to me. I'll help you deal with this so that you're not using anger to solve the problem. That's often very helpful. All right, so next question has to do with using anger, using a break when you're trying to get out the door. So yes, I understand that there are times when the break is not, this doesn't work. When you're trying to get out the door, you don't have time for a child to sit down for a little bit and deal with this. And then also, you don't have time before bed. Some kids would like to sit in the hall. So there's sometimes when the break doesn't work, but it's just a good tool to use in family life in order to, and that kids need to develop in order to be most successful in addressing the challenges they face. What can you do when a child states that nothing gets him mad or angry, but his mom constantly complains that the child is an angry child and that he also hits her when he's angry? The child is 5. How can you get him to talk about what is getting him upset? All right, so it is helpful if we can have children talk about their anger, but it's not necessary for us to move to a solution. I find that some children are better at talking about emotions than others, but the ability to talk about it may take a few more years. He's 5 now. It may be till he moves into the more abstract thinking kind of, which happens between 7 and 8 years old. So maybe he won't be able to talk about it as much until then. But I just want you to know that he doesn't have to talk about it in order to get well. You can verbalize a lot of what's going on for him. Basically, when a child is upset and he's exceeding the lines, in other words, he's going above the normal range and he's crossed the line, which turns it into an episode by yelling or by hitting or by doing something else, blaming, sarcasm, it could be anything. But at 5 years old, you say he's hitting her mom. So what we're going to do is we're going to say to this 5-year-old, look, I understand, and we're going to phrase this for him. We're not asking him whether he's angry. The first part of the question says, what can you do when a child states that nothing gets him mad or angry? We're not going to ask him what gets him angry or mad because he seems to be in a either position of denial or not understanding or whatever. So we're going to say something like this, and this is transferring responsibility to the child. So listen to these words carefully. Bill, I know you have a problem with anger. I can tell because I see you hitting your mom, and that's not right. And I can help you with that, with your problem. By saying your problem, I'm helping Billy understand that it's Billy's anger that's a problem. And so here's what we're going to do. When you start to get angry, I'm going to have you take a break because that's going to teach you how to pull back instead of push forward when you start to get angry. So we're going to practice that. In fact, we're going to practice it right now. I know you're not angry, but show me you can take a break. We're going to practice at non-disciplined times. And then when we see anger coming on, we're going to say, whoop, we're going to draw attention to it by saying, you don't have to say, hey, you're starting to get angry, because then the child's going to say, no, I'm not. What you're going to say to a child is, oh, I see you moving kind of fast there. Oh, I see you're making those grunting sounds again. Do you need some help there? Or can you bring it back down? The emotional tension's rising here. What I say to kids when to help them understand at 5 years old about anger is I say, anger is energy that comes into your body. And when that energy comes into your body, then it wants to come out. And so if it comes out of your eyes, you start crying or glaring at someone. If it comes out of your hands, you hit or you punch someone. If it comes out of your feet, you kick or stomp off. Or if it comes out of your mouth, you scream or say unkind things. If it comes out of all of those places at the same time, we call that a temper tantrum. So what's really important here is that you learn how to manage the energy that comes into your body. I can see it coming on sometimes. You start to get those big eyes, and I can tell that it's happening. Or it may, I want to stop you before you start hitting somebody, because that seems like that's what your go-to is here. You are trying to get the energy out through your hands, and I can help you with that. Self-control is the solution, and the key here is the break. Pull back. We're going to practice that together, so I'm going to look for ways to do that. So helping that 5-year-old be able to deal with his anger is strategic, and the break's going to be a key, I think, a key component to making that work. Here's another question, which really is important, and I see this somewhat regularly. The anger in our family is primarily from my husband. We are currently separated because of this, but not before we had all picked up some of these behaviors. Do you have any suggestions for helping us deal with the emotional tension in a loving, supportive way that promotes healing? Our goal is reconciliation. Okay, great. So you're separated, but your goal is reconciliation. I think you're going to want to look at the traits that make a family successful and try to develop specific plans for addressing them. I would suggest as you work with your husband, you're going to have honest conversations about emotion. How are we going to handle emotion in the family life? When the kids start getting unruly and they need to be disciplined, what are we going to do without using anger to solve the problem? So that's one thing. As you're working toward reconciliation, you want to have serious conversations about these 10 traits that make a successful family. If we're going to have a family together, how are we going to do these things better? Go to the website, the 10 Traits website on our webpage, and you'll see what the 10 traits are, and that may help you. But it sounds like what you're saying, and this is often the case in a family, is that not only is the emotion contagious, but the coping mechanisms are contagious too. So if one person's yelling, somebody else starts yelling. And so we develop these name calling or you always or you never or sarcasm or bad attitude techniques that we pick up from other people. You're concerned that your younger children are picking them up from your older children. You're concerned that your husband has left an impression on other people, that the people in your home have picked up some negative ways of dealing with the emotion. And so I would say that you want to lay this out on the table. You don't have to make dad the bad guy, but I would say to them, to your family, as a family, maybe, I would say, one of the things that makes a family successful is an ability to handle emotions well. Now, I know that sometimes in our home we get angry. Somebody gets angry, then somebody else gets angry. I'd like us to make two lists, a list of responses that aren't very helpful and responses that could be more helpful. Let's talk about those two together. We don't have to pinpoint dad, but we can start talking about the things that maybe dad used to do. Maybe he's growing in his ability to manage his anger, but he used to do some things. We don't have to bring his name up. All we can do is we can say is, hey, this is what used to happen. Somebody starts yelling or somebody starts name calling or whatever, getting really intense or physical. So let's try to move away from, what do we need to move to? And let's brainstorm together how we can have a family that's successful. Can you have a family that's successful when dad and mom are separated? I think so. I think we see in the scriptures successful families that are non-traditional families. I do think having a husband and a wife in a home is great for kids and does a lot to nurture them on both sides. However, if one of those is missing, God steps in and he is the father to the fatherless. So we know that God does some special work in the heart of people who have only one parent. So we want to balance those two ideas. One is, yes, it's helpful when we have parents in a home, two parents, nurturing that family relationship. But at the same time, if we don't have those, it doesn't mean our family's doomed. We don't have to, I wouldn't even consider ourselves a broken family. What we're is a family that's growing and developing. So let's keep working on this and grow together in order to be most effective. Next question. How can I help my 12-year-old son who is over the top angry with his 10-year-old brother all the time? Many times a day. I don't know how to help him get to the root of it, but his heart is hard toward his brother, and there's a root of bitterness. Okay, so now we're talking about something very deep in the heart. There's two kinds of anger. There's frustration anger and there's hurt anger. In that CD I mentioned about the anger, we break anger up, and a plan for dealing with anger is really helpful. So your 12-year-old could certainly listen to that CD and learn about hurt anger and how damaging it is, because anger turns into bitterness if not addressed properly. So how do you help your 12-year-old? Okay, so I think you're going to use a multifaceted approach. It's not just a simple answer. First of all, I think you're going to do some teaching about anger. And we're going to teach that anger's energy that comes into your body, that angry people are unhappy people, that it's not good enough to be right. You also need to be wise. That meanness is a sign of a weak person. All of those things, we're going to do some teaching about what anger does to a person, how it damages them. So teaching is one component. Next component is firmness. When you see it, you're going to call him on it, and you're going to address it. You may use a consequence, or you just might have him sit down until he settles down and is ready to come back and address it or apologize or something. Third thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to do some visioning. Son, visioning is, why do we want to work on this? Let me attract you to something better. There's a better way for you to respond to your brother. I know your 10-year-old brother annoys you, and he teases you sometimes, he baits you, and it's a problem. I would suspect that's the case. The 10-year-old's probably not innocent. But God has placed your brother in this family for an important reason, probably for you, so that you can develop the skills necessary to relate to someone who's annoying or someone who's irritating, who provokes you, because you're likely to work with somebody someday, and you'll say, boy, I'm sure I'm glad I had a brother that I learned how to relate to, so I can relate better in the office now. So first of all, you'll be firm, you're teaching, and you're visioning. But then we're also going to practice doing the right thing. Son, you're 12, this is 12-year-old son. Son, I want you to go in, your brother's in the playroom. I want you to go in there and show me that you can play nicely with him for 5 minutes without creating any conflict. And I'll know that you're successful if he's laughing or he's feeling good about the experience when you come out. 5 minutes. I want success, so I limit the time to 5 minutes. Show me what you can do. And send them in. So we're going to practice. You might have to practice 5 minutes at a time, several times a day, because now we're not just trying to stop something that's negative, but we're trying to do something that's positive. The over-the-top idea, when you say over-the-top anger, it tells me that his emotion is starting to control him instead of him being able to manage his own emotion. So we're going to have to do some anger management therapy, can I say, or work to give him tools. I would say, son, I want you to sit down. I want you to tell me 5 things you're going to do when you start to get angry, things you're going to do and things you're going to say. Do and say. Because I don't want him to just do things like count to 10 or get a drink or walk around the room or take a deep breath. All those are good. He needs to choose which ones he wants to do. But also, what are you going to say to yourself that's going to prevent you from going over the top or having an anger episode? So working on this with him as a concerted effort over time with a 12-year-old, we ought to see some significant change take place in him in 40 days. That's what I would suggest when I work with kids with anger issues, by holding them accountable on a weekly basis and by giving them specific plans, helping them develop plans, and positioning parents well as coaches with that child with firmness as well as knowing how to encourage and so on, then we see some significant change. So it's hard. This is really hard with some kids to overcome these issues, but we're trying to use a multifaceted approach to address that. I'm going to put that first slide back up in just a moment in case you didn't get to see that slide that has a multifaceted approach for individualized anger. And then you can take a screenshot of it if you want. It may be of help to you. But let me read this next question. I'll start answering that while I put this other screen up. During a break, if a child does not have a repentant heart but wants to come out immediately, how can you encourage them to change their heart and take the time to let that happen? Also, is it helpful to require kids to apologize if they've hurt someone? Is there a good way to require this so that it's not just a behavior modification, but really being sorry? Okay. So you're dealing with the heart of a child. And as you deal with the heart, you want certain things. What we're trying to do is we're trying to gain those things inside the heart of a child in order for the child to respond well. So as we do that, we don't always get the perfect result we want. So let's say you send a child to a break and he comes back, I'm ready, and you know he's not ready. You may say to him, I can tell you're not ready, you need to go sit down. And in this case, I might use a timer that says, okay, you need to stay there for 5 minutes, but don't come back when the timer rings. You have to wait till the timer rings, but don't come back until you're settled down. I'm watching to see how you're settled down. Is 5 minutes long enough, or do you need it to be 15 or 30? So some children need more time to settle down their hearts before they come back. So you could do this over and over again, keep sending a child back until they settle down. And that's effective till a child comes to the place where they are more contrite and you can see it when they come back, okay, I'm ready. So that's one way to deal with this. Another thing is I find that some children are just so torn up inside. They're just so emotionally upset that sometimes a child comes back and says, I'm ready. And I say, okay, look, I can tell by your heart you're still wrestling with his inside, but I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to give you a task to do, and I want you to show me that you can do the task with a good attitude. And by doing this, you may be able to work out some of this anger that's in your heart by starting to do the right thing. So I'd like you to go into the bathroom, get the trash can that's in there, bring it out here, empty it into the kitchen and the kitchen trash, and then put it back. Show me that you're having a good attitude, and then we can move forward. And so in that way, see, the emotions are a tricky thing here. I prefer using the break as much as possible, sending the child back. But in some cases, I got children who are really emotional, and I'll say, okay, let's work it out. Or I might say, all right, I can tell you're still angry, but you're trying to come back here. Would you like for me to hold you for a minute while you settle down some more? Those are 3 completely different solutions to helping a child deal with a heart issue. I don't know which one's best for your child, but I do know that there's not one cookie cutter way to raise kids. But what I'm trying to do is I'm not letting the anger go. I'm not letting a child just say, okay, you can go, and then they start going down the hall and slamming doors or punching his sister on the way. We're going to address the emotion. Somehow we're going to address it. And if I knew your child a little bit more, I might have some more ideas for you. But I would suggest think outside the box. Maybe the idea you're currently using is one you want to change. And not because it's bad, but because you've used it for a while and you just need another choice. So that may be helpful for you as you move forward. One more question I'm going to take here before we're done. What if the child refuses to go to a break? Okay, well, it depends how old the child is. If the child's preschooler, then we can say, you need to go sit in a break and sit down. If the child's elementary age, we can say, all life stops for you until you take a break. You are not free to play on the computer, get involved with electronics, go outside the house, or even go to your bedroom until you take a break. Okay, so I'm not going to fight with a child, but all life stops with that child until they take a break. And that might mean that for a couple of hours, they're wandering around the house or whatever, because you don't want to get into a physical altercation, but you're saying to them, you're done. You need to be able to deal with this with me and come back to me before you're free to do anything else. So the break is the hardest thing we teach at the National Center for Biblical Parenting in our parents seminars. So it takes some time to develop it and to practice and to make it work. So you're going to want to look for ways to get it working. And then if the child, I would suggest that with some kids, we're going to practice the break at non-disciplined times to develop it as a skill. It says, okay, we're going to have a snack in a few minutes. You need to show me you can take a break. Remember, that's what we're working on. Explaining to children that this is an adult skill, this isn't a child skill. And when by doing that, what we're saying to kids is, this isn't just a punishment. What this is an opportunity for you to learn an adult skill here and pull back. This is what adults do when they find themselves in trouble or getting emotionally upset. They need to know how to slow down or pull back and settle down first. So it's not optional. It's part of the training. We're going to keep working on it. And I would say if you work on it as a skill in family life, and as it's not optional, you will see some significant change. It does take time sometimes. I work with lots of families. If you need more help in this area, you can contact our office. You can email me at scott@biblicalparenting.org. I can't always answer all the questions. If there's something in particular you find helpful, I would appreciate an email that says, hey, I really liked this about the webinar. As I continue to do them, it would be helpful for me to know what's beneficial for you. So my email address is scott@biblicalparenting.org. Scott@biblicalparenting.org. You can email me. Can't always answer all the questions that come to me, but if you want me to point you to our resource, I can do that. Go to the page that we're recommending, or there are a number of tools that are talked about. In a few minutes, I think now even the webinar page, the webinar page for next time isn't set up yet, but it'll be set up in the next 24 hours. So you'll be able to go there and sign up for that webinar if you're interested in that too. All right. I know that this is really challenging, and the emotion, it's saddening for some. It's just emotionally upsetting for others, and many of us have to deal with our anger. So I'd like to pray again for all of us as we go forward. Heavenly Father, I just want to ask for your blessing. Now take something I ask from the things that I've said or that's in your word here, and use it in the lives of families. Have it to ring true in the heart, and I pray that you'd use the webinar experience to provide some solutions for parents as they do the difficult job of parenting. We ask for you to bring peace to the homes of these families that are represented here. Thank you, Lord, in Jesus' name, amen. If you're interested in the Parent Training Center program, or a live seminar, or you're interested in the membership program, all of that's, links to all of those things are on the webinar page. So please feel free to go there and check it out. Thank you very much for being with me on this. Tell your friends about it. Next one coming up next month, and you can find out more information about that. Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.